Today we are working Psalm 78. In Psalm Magic, Psalm 78 is used to intensify psychic powers, to gain favors from influential people, and also to bring wisdom. Today I would like to use Psalm 78 to bring about any manifestation you desire. Psalm 78 is one of the longest psalms in the book, second only to Psalm 119. And it's a very intricate, detailed psalm, and today we are going to be using it for the purpose of manifesting a desire. The way we work Psalm Magic is extremely effective and very powerful. We take the psalm in question and we recite it out loud once, all the way through. This is called an incantation. After the recitation of the incantation, we go back through the same psalm, one verse at a time, and we search for hidden meanings behind each verse. We call those magic seeds. As we search for these magic seeds and we find them and apply them to whatever the issue is that we brought to the psalm, we are in effect taking those seeds and planting them deeply in the fertile grounds of our mind, where they take root, they grow, they blossom forth, and they bear fruit after their kind. And that is what you and I are going to do together right now with Psalm 78. Give ear, O my people, to my law. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, showing to the generations to come the praises of the Lord, and his strength and his wonderful works that he hath done. For he established a testimony in Jacob, and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers that they should make them known to their children, that the generation to come might know them, even the generation which should be born, who should arise and declare them to their children, that they might set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments, and might not be as their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation that has set not their heart aright, and whose spirit was not steadfast with God. The children of Ephraim, being armed and carrying bows, turned back in the day of battle. They kept not the covenant of God and refused to walk in his law, and forgot his works and his wonders that he had showed them. Marvelous things did he in the sight of their fathers in the land of Egypt, in the field of Zoan. He divided the sea and caused them to pass through, and he made the waters to stand as an heap. In the daytime also he led them with a cloud, and all the night with a light of fire. He clave the rocks in the wilderness and gave them drink as out of the great depths. He brought streams also out of the rock and caused waters to run down like rivers. And they sinned yet more against him by provoking the Most High in the wilderness, and they tempted God in their heart by asking meat for their lust. Yea, they spake against God. They said, Can God furnish a table in the wilderness? Behold, he smote the rock, that the waters gushed out and the streams overflowed. Can he give bread also? Can he provide flesh for his people? Therefore the Lord heard this, and was wroth. So a fire was kindled against Jacob, and anger also came up against Israel, because they believed not in God, and trusted not in his salvation, though he had commanded the clouds from above, and opened the doors of heaven, and had rained down manna upon them to eat, and had given them of the corn of heaven. Man did eat angels' food, he sent them meat to the full. He caused an east wind to blow in the heaven, and by his power he brought in the south wind. He rained flesh also upon them as dust, and feathered fowls like as the sand of the sea, and he let it fall in the midst of their camp round about their habitations. So they did eat and were well filled, for he gave them their own desire. They were not estranged from their lust, but while their meat was yet in their mouths, the wrath of God came upon them, and slew the fattest of them, and smote down the chosen men of Israel. For all this they sinned still, and believed not for his wondrous works. Therefore their days did he consume in vanity, and their years in trouble. When he slew them, then they sought him, and they returned and inquired early after God. And they remembered that God was their rock, and the high God their Redeemer. Nevertheless, they did flatter him with their mouth, and they lied unto him with their tongues. For their heart was not right with him, neither were they steadfast in his covenant. But he, being full of compassion, forgave their iniquity, and destroyed them not. Yea, many a time turned he his anger away, and did not stir up all his wrath. For he remembered that they were but flesh, a wind that passed away, and cometh not again. How oft did they provoke him in the wilderness, and grieve him in the desert? Yea, they turned back and tempted God, and limited the Holy One of Israel. They remembered not his hand, nor the day when he delivered them from the enemy. How he had wrought his signs in Egypt, and his wonders in the field of Zoan, and had turned their rivers into blood, and their floods that they could not drink. He sent divers sorts of flies among them, which devoured them, and frogs which destroyed them. He gave also their increase unto the caterpillar, and their labor unto the locust. He destroyed their vines with hail, and their sycamore trees with frost. He gave up their cattle also to the hail, and their flocks to hot thunderbolts. He cast upon them the fierceness of his anger, wrath and indignation and trouble, by sending evil angels among them. He made a way to his anger, and spared not their soul from death, but gave their life over to the pestilence, and smote all the firstborn in Egypt, the chief of their strength, in the tabernacles of Ham. But made his own people to go forth like sheep, and guided them in the wilderness like a flock. And he led them on safely, so that they feared not. But the sea overwhelmed their enemies. And he brought them to the border of his sanctuary, even to this mountain, which his right hand had purchased, and divided them an inheritance by line, and made the tribes of Israel to dwell in their tents. Yet they tempted and provoked the Most High, and kept not his testimonies, but turned back and dealt unfaithfully like their fathers. They were turned aside like a deceitful bow. For they provoked him to anger with their high places, and moved him to jealousy with their graven images. When God heard this, he was wroth, and greatly abhorred Israel, so that he forsook the tabernacle of Shiloh, the tent which he placed among them, and delivered his strength into captivity, and his glory into the enemy's hand. He gave his people over also unto the sword, and was wroth with his inheritance. The fire consumed their young men, and their maidens were not given to marriage. The priests fell by the sword, and their widows made no lamentation. Then the Lord awakened as one out of sleep, and like a man that shouteth by reason of wine. And he smote his enemies in the hinder parts, and he put them to a perpetual reproach. Moreover, he refused the tabernacle of Joseph, and chose not the tribe of Ephraim, but chose the tribe of Judah, the Mount Zion which he loved. And he built his sanctuary like high palaces, like the earth which he hath established forever. He chose David also his servant, and took him from the sheepfolds. From following the ewes great with young, he brought him to feed Jacob his people, and Israel his inheritance. So he fed them according to the integrity of his heart, and guided them by the skillfulness of his hands. This is a depiction of the entire history of Israel according to the ancient scriptures. So that's why it's such a long psalm. And one of the reasons why it's such a good psalm to use for manifestation is because it goes through the entire process. Now, one of the most important things that we as magicians can see in this psalm is there's a very clear depiction between what is the Demiurge and what is the Lord. Now remember, the Lord is simply a symbol. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh is simply a symbol for the one power, the one force, the one source in all the world. There's only one substance. There's only one force in all the universe, and that is called the Lord. The Lord is for us because we are simply an extension or an emanation of the Lord. We are not separate from the Lord. You can think of the Demiurge as an urge to be separate. The habit that we have formed as a species to think that we are separate from our source, or that the source doesn't even exist. The demiurge, or the individual ego, operates through something called projection. Everything is projection. That's part of the way that things are created in this world. But the ego projects images that aren't true. And so, therefore, everything that the ego projects creates a dream, creates an illusion, whereas what God projects is true. When you see vengeance and violence against its creations by the Lord, that's a projection of those people onto God. And a projection is simply what the demiurge is. It's a projection of our own thoughts onto this idea of the Lord. It starts out with, "Give ear, O my people, to my law. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable, and I will utter dark sayings of old." So here's our teacher. Our teacher, our inner guide, is using this story to show us all kinds of wisdom. And this psalm is a wisdom tradition, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, showing to the generation to come the praises of the Lord and his strength and his wonderful works that he hath done. The children here are your own thoughts, the things that you want, and especially whatever you've brought to the psalm, the manifestation that you desire. So what you have to do is you have to think of yourself as a loving parent in this regard, and you're going to teach wisdom to your child. In other words, you're going to teach this new thought form how to manifest and what not to do, so that your manifestation will bring you happiness. For he established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers, that they should make them known to their children. We are describing here the idea that the same way in which we were created, we have that same creative power to bring about what we desire. There's a sequence of creation that the infinite goes through, and that same sequence of creation is what we go through. And our children in this particular instance represents our desire. That the generation to come might know them, even the children which should be born, who should arise and declare them to their children. And so remember that not only is your desire going to come about, but that desire will bring about new desires, which will bring about new children, and so on and so on. And that's just the natural way we expand. That they might see their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments. Okay, so setting us up for what's to come. This is all of the wisdom that we have to remember, that we can teach this manifestation so that it can be something good for us. And might not be as their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation that set not their heart aright, and whose spirit was not steadfast with God. And how many things in your life, how many manifestations that you may not be taking responsibility for, but actually did come straight from your own consciousness, ended up not being so good for you because you didn't bother to create these thought forms with wisdom. The children of Ephraim, being armed and carrying bows, turned back in the day of battle. They kept not the covenant of God and refused to walk in his law. Ephraim is the northern tribe. This particular psalm was written from the point of view of a southern tribe. So, of course, the southern tribe thought it was better than the northern tribe. But in this sense, what we're talking about with that northern tribe is any time that you've had manifestations in your life that you didn't give the wisdom to, that you didn't connect with the will of the infinite, those things were tenuous at best. And here it says the children of Ephraim, being armed and carrying bows, turned back in the day of battle. They got afraid. They didn't trust. It says they kept not the covenant of God and refused to walk in his law. They forgot that the law was for their protection. The law, the covenant, was for their protection and for their use. And so they got afraid of their own power, and then they instead succumbed to their own fears, their own egos. So we're not going to do that with this new thought form, but we should remember that we've done that many, many times with our other manifestations in the past. Nothing to feel guilty about, but a lesson to learn from so that we don't do that this time. When it says that they kept not the covenant, let's remember the covenant is simply an agreement. And for us as magicians, that agreement is that we understand the law. And the law is the law of cause and effect. that the invisible world is the world of cause, and the physical world is the world of effect. That's how we protect ourselves from things like superstition, and it's also how we empower ourselves so that we know how to create what we want. But now we're not doing it all by ourselves. We are co-creating with the Lord, or with the force that is all. And forgot his works and his wonders that he had showed them, reiterating and finishing the idea that miscreation is very easy to do. Marvelous things did he in the sight of their fathers in the land of Egypt, in the field of Zoan. He divided the sea and caused them to pass through, and he made the waters to stand as an heap. In the daytime he also led them with a cloud, and all the night with a light of fire. He clave the rocks in the wilderness and gave them drink as out of the great depths. He brought streams also out of the rock and caused the waters to run down like rivers. This is remembering in this particular story when they were in the wilderness that they didn't have to worry about being overcome by the army because the water swallowed them up. They didn't have to worry about being thirsty because the rocks gave forth water. So they were taken care of. When we are making this new thought form, we have to remind ourselves not to judge by appearances. Whatever our goal is, we can't say, well, since it's not completely fully formed, the instant I thought of it, it didn't work. No, we have to have faith. We have to have faith that it'll carry us through until that manifestation happens. And if we need something in the meantime, it will be provided. And they sinned yet more against him by provoking the Most High in the wilderness, and they tempted God in their heart by asking meat for their lust. Yea, they spake against God. They said, Can God furnish a table in the wilderness? Behold, he smote the rock, that the waters gushed out and the streams overflowed. Can he give bread also? Can he provide flesh for his people? Therefore the God heard this and was wroth. And so a fire was kindled against Jacob, and anger also came up against Israel. So in the midst of being taken care of, these people were like, oh yeah, can you do this? Can you do that? And we've got to be very careful when we are building our own thought forms that we don't go down that path of either being arrogant and saying, I'm doing this all by myself. This is my thought form. Because when we do that, we can have that. We can have our own thought forms, but we're not as wise as we think we are. And we have already been admonished to remember all those thought forms that we've done that with that didn't work out so well. So rather than that, we are going to do this in co-creation with the infinite, and we aren't going to so-called tempt God, meaning we don't have to second guess the process. We can have faith that all is working out according to our highest good within this thought form while we're creating this, and until the manifestation comes, we have to stay the course. Have faith that our needs are going to be met in the meantime. Though he had commanded the clouds from above and opened the doors of heaven and rained down manna on them to eat, and had given them the corn of heaven, man did eat angels' food. He sent them meat to the full. He caused an east wind to blow in the heaven, and by his power he brought in the south wind. He rained flesh also upon them as dust, and feathered fowls like the sands of the sea. So they were hungry, they were thirsty, they had no food, they had no water, and so he made water come out of rocks. He made bread fall out of heaven, bread that was only served to the angels. So this is ambrosia from the Greek religion. Same thing. The water from the stone would be the nectar, stuff that only angels eat. And then if that wasn't enough, well, we want meat. Well, okay. So he blew all kinds of fowl their way. And so they had all their needs met, and still it wasn't good enough. That's what we have to be careful of. When we are in the midst of manifesting this thing that we desire so much, during the process of the manifestation, we have to be trusting that our needs are going to be met and not know where those needs are going to be met from. When we have faith in it and we see that everything is happening for our own good, the ego mind's natural tendency is to say, I don't know. It's not that big of a deal, is it? Or this would have happened anyway, somehow negating the whole idea that your magic is working. To be aware of that, because that is there to taint the thought form. And he let it fall in the midst of their camp round about their habitation, so that all the good was coming as much as they could possibly get. And so they did eat, and they were filled. for he gave them their own desire. What do you want? Okay, here it is. But they were not estranged from their lust, but while their meat was yet in their mouths, the wrath of God came upon them and slew the fattest of them and smote down the chosen men of Israel. This is the Demiurge. God does not smite. That's not a thing. The infinite doesn't smite. The infinite only loves and provides, brings about all good. We project our own violence onto the idea of the infinite. That's what this is. And so when we go against the law of cause and effect, or we put causes into play that then bring about effects that we don't like, we say, why did God do that to me? And this is very important for us to remember. Again, this is a historical psalm, so let's not do that with this thought form. Let's not go down that road. We've done that before. We've done that before where we are lusting after results. That's the lust there. When you lust after a result, that means it has to be like this. I need it right now. Where is it? Where is it? That's lusting after a result. If you're lusting after a result, you are delaying the result, and you are also sullying the result, tainting the result, making it less perfect. And sometimes you are turning that blessing that you are asking for into its own curse by lusting after the result itself. Because then you are forgetting that it's due to your connection with the infinite that these things are happening, and you're instead conjuring up your own ideas of what needs to happen, which is something that you do separate from the infinite. For all this they sinned still, and believed not for his wondrous works. Therefore their days did he consume in vanity, and their years in trouble. When he slew them, then they sought him, and they returned and inquired early after God. As their own thought forms of vanity came upon them, even though they were projecting that onto the infinite and saying, God's hurting us, God's mad at us, not taking responsibility for the fact that that was their own thought forms projected back on them. When he slew them, then they sought him, and they returned and inquired early after God. To inquire early after God is, I'm going to go with God first this time. I'm not going to wait and go for God as the last resort. I'm going to do it first thing. And so that's what we are being reminded to do now. Let's not go through that drama with this thought form. We're going to go straight to God, and we're going to do it the right way. We're going to make sure that we are at one with the so-called covenant. And remember that cause and effect works. And what is the thought form in the invisible world is what will be the experience in the physical world. And therefore, we want our thought form to be perfect. And the way that that can happen is that we co-create that thought form with the infinite rather than doing it all by ourselves. Nevertheless, they did flatter him with their mouth. They lied unto him with their tongues, for their heart was not right with him, neither were they steadfast in his covenant. And this is what we don't want to do. You can't fool the law of cause and effect. It knows what you're thinking. It knows what you're feeling. It knows what you believe. So it's important to get very clear with that and not just pretend everything is okay when it's not okay. You have to allow yourself to be extremely vigilant with your thought form when you're building this idea of what you want to manifest, your intentions, that it be the purest form of your desire. And if you need help, which you do, because you're a human being, you ask the infinite to help you. But he, being full of compassion, forgave their iniquity and destroyed them not. All of a sudden, the Demiurge has been quieted. Because why? Because they went to the infinite rather than serving their own lusts, their own ideas. So as soon as they stop making their own choices by themselves, the Demiurge is no longer what they are interacting with. The ego is no longer what they are interacting with. They are interacting with the actual creator. And that's because they have so-called humbled themselves. They have allowed themselves to be in alignment with that creator and understand that they are the creation of the creator, not the creator of the creator. For he remembered that they were but flesh, a wind that passeth away and cometh not again. How oft did they provoke him in the wilderness and grieve him in the desert? This is the psalmist giving an anthropomorphic idea of the infinite. It's not accurate, though, because the infinite isn't going to walk through the desert and say, well, they're just human, so let's be nice to them. That's what we would do when we are being compassionate. So it's trying to give an anthropomorphic spin on the story so that the ancient people could understand better. But in reality, the compassion never stopped. In reality, there was never any reason for that compassion to stop because that's a constant. The only thing that happened is that we blocked our experience of the infinite's compassion by conjuring everything for ourselves. Yea, they turned back and tempted God and limited the Holy One of Israel. They remembered not his hand, nor the day when he delivered them from the enemy. How he had wrought his signs in Egypt and his wonders in the field of Zoan, and had turned their rivers into blood and their floods that they could not drink. He sent diverse sorts of flies among them, which devoured them, and frogs, which destroyed them. He gave also their increase to the caterpillar, and their labor unto the locust. He destroyed their vines with hail, and their sycamore trees with frost. He gave up their cattle also to the hail, and their flocks to the thunderbolts. He cast them upon the fierceness of his anger, wrath, and indignation, and trouble by sending evil angels among them. He made a way to his anger. He spared not their soul from death, but gave their life over to the pestilence, and smote all the firstborn in Egypt, the chief of their strength in the tabernacles of Ham. So there is a litany of so-called curses that the infinite brought down upon the so-called sinners. And if you're not looking at this from a magical perspective, you'll think, God is kind of scary. But you have to understand that's not God. That was their own effects coming back on them. That is what they got to deal with when they decided to create separately from the infinite. That was something they made. They blamed it on God, and that's why it's the Demiurge, because it's a projection. But in reality, it's what they did by disconnecting themselves from the infinite. And the infinite can't go in and say, no, you can't do that, because the infinite gave us free will. We can use our minds any way we want. Now, again, this whole idea here is a history lesson so that we don't do that this time. So that this thought form is going to be free from all of these so-called curses, because we understand that we don't want to project images onto the screen of space all by ourselves. Because if we were so good at that, we would already be living in paradise. If we knew what images to project onto the screen of space that would make us happy. But since we have had many, many instances throughout history of our thought forms not working out so well for ourselves, this time we're going to do it in concert with the infinite. But he made his own people to go forth like sheep and guided them in the wilderness like a flock. And he led them on safely so that they feared not, but the sea overwhelmed their enemies. And this is what the infinite wants to do for you. When things don't look like they're going exactly the right way in regards to what this desire is, it's okay, because you're not thinking all by yourself and making your own decisions completely alone. Now you're doing it with the infinite as your guide, or that inner guide, which is a representation of the infinite inside you, that inner guidance, that intuition. And so you're not going to make those mistakes. You're going to be led. You're going to be guided. It's not, oh, I've got this. I know what to do. I know what to do all by yourself anymore. It's, what do I do? Where do I go? Lead me and I will go there. All for the purpose of the infinite showing you how to get to the manifestation that you desire. It's all for you. And divided them an inheritance by line, and made the tribes of Israel to dwell in their tents. The infinite's already got your inheritance, line by line. And just so that you know, it's not a limited inheritance. This thing that you want is really no big deal. Of course, the infinite wants it, but it wants you to have it in its perfect essence, in the perfect form for you that's not going to cause you problems. Yet they tempted and provoked the Most High, and kept not his testimonies, but turned back and dealt unfaithfully like their fathers. They were turned aside like a deceitful bow, for they provoked him to anger with their high places, and moved him to jealousy with their graven images. The graven images, it's a similar thing of lusting after results. You don't need to worry about all the particulars of this manifestation. They may be the way that you say that you want them, or they may be much better. But if you are bowing down to the particular image and saying nothing but this, you're going to get into trouble. So this or something much better. So that he forsook the tabernacles of Shiloh, the tent which he placed among men, and delivered his strength into captivity and his glory into the enemy's hand. He gave his people over also unto the sword, which was wroth with his inheritance. The fire consumed their young men, and their maidens were not given to marriage. Their priests fell by the sword, and their widows made no lamentation. This is again the people saying, look what God did to us as a people, and not look what we did. Look what we did. This is all of our own projections coming back onto us. This is not the will of the infinite. And he smote his enemies in the hinder parts, and he put them to a perpetual reproach. Moreover, he refused the tabernacle of Joseph, and chose not the tribe of Ephraim. These northern tribes now are, of course, the ones that God said no to, because they are a rival tribe than the one writing this psalm. But it's a great symbol for us in regards to remembering every time things didn't work out for us, or things worked out for us in a way that we didn't like, that we are now able to take responsibility for the fact that we were thinking alone and separate as our own egos, and creating and conjuring experiences for ourselves rather than working as co-creators with the infinite. And he built his sanctuary like high palaces, like the earth which he established forever. He chose David also his servant, and took him from the sheepfolds. And David, of course, is from the southern tribes, so of course he's the good guy. But David represents our own heart chakra and our own ability to be human. Remember, David made a ton of mistakes, but the infinite never deserted David. Why? Because David didn't desert the infinite. David made mistakes and came to the infinite with the mistakes and said, I messed up, help me. And the infinite said, oh, sure, here we go. We're going to do this. And that's what the infinite's doing for you, as long as you ask for it. But the infinite won't come out and say, you must listen to me. You must do it my way. The infinite lets you have your own mistakes if you want them, and lets you try to be separate in your own little nightmare if that's what you want. But then you get the results of that. And all of this litany of curses that it's been talking about are any time in your life that you've had problems, if you can look and see that that was because of the fact that you weren't working in conjunction with the infinite, that you were working as your own separate agent. From following the ewes great with young, he brought them to feed Jacob his people and Israel his inheritance. It's going back to the sheep and the shepherding here. When you allow yourself to be guided and led in the moment, and you don't say, no, I know what to do, and you don't rush in and do your own thing your own way, what you're going to get is everything you want and then some. Not only are you going to get what you want, but it's going to be better because there's going to be blessings that you didn't know were possible. That's your full inheritance. If you had your full inheritance, you wouldn't even know what your life looked like anymore. It would be completely different. And it's not that anything is withholding your inheritance from you except for you. And the way that you're withholding your inheritance, according to this psalm, is by not keeping the so-called covenant. In other words, not being true to the law of cause and effect. When you're true to the law of cause and effect, and you recognize that the best and most certain cause to bring you happiness is working in conjunction with the infinite, when you realize that, then you don't have to worry about those negative manifestations anymore, because that's not the will of the infinite. So he fed them according to the integrity of his heart and guided them by the skillfulness of his hands. And that's what you want. And you can even just take this last verse and use it as a little mantra while you're working this spell, while you're working this, whatever this manifestation is that you're going for. So he fed them according to the integrity of his heart and guided them by the skillfulness of his hands. Isn't that wonderful? You're going to be guided, you're going to be fed, you're going to have everything that you want, and you're going to have it in a way that maybe is different than what you thought you wanted, but it's going to be a lot better. But you have to just allow yourself to operate this magic through faith and not judge by appearances. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to stay the course. We're going to remain faithful. We're going to allow our thought form to manifest in the highest way possible. And we are going to keep our connection to the infinite and be guided and led every step of the way. And while the manifestation is yet to come about in the physical, we are going to allow ourselves to be guided and led then too, even if it comes down to having to rely on manna from heaven and water from rocks, knowing that those things will be given to us as needed in whatever way those things manifest for us until the full manifestation can happen. So you just keep coming back to the psalm each and every day until you get a sense that whatever you brought to the psalm is working out. You'll get a good sense of peace and certainty. You're not anxious about it anymore. And when you get that, it's like a click. That means that your spell is cast and you don't have to do this anymore. You can move on to something else. Thank you so much for spending some time with me. Until next time, blessed be.